And Carlos not only kept our place looking great, but when we had a patient with lice or there was vomit and everybody is so afraid and wigs out, Carlos shows up like the professional he is and does his job with a smile.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. Well, today we're continuing with part 2 of our holiday episode where we offer up some brief highlights from a few of our favorite Season 3 interviews. Today we'll have short clips from 5 different episodes from the 2021 season, and we'll get started with pulmonary medicine specialist, coach, spiritualist, Dr. Carla Rodering. She'll tell us about her memories of growing up in a boxcar in a rail yard. Do you mind sharing with us how the family wound up residing in a railroad car?
You know, it was, my parents were young, and my father had gone with his family to this little town in North Dakota where they homesteaded, but my dad never did any farming. So he did things like set pins, at the bowling alley and got paid by the pin and those kinds of things. And when they were married, he went to work for the railroad, and there was this boxcar that somehow had been converted into a house, a home, a dwelling. And I'm not sure exactly how they got there, but I lived the first 6 years of my life in that boxcar with no running water in the middle of North Dakota. And I have these memories, people, I didn't know there was anything unusual about that. I thought that was just the way of the world. But I do remember that, North Dakota's cold and the winds blow. And I remember my uncles would come and wrap tar paper around the outside of this boxcar and then stack bales of hay to keep the wind from blowing through in the wintertime.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it felt pretty snug to me. I remember having to stand on the arm of the couch to step into the room that served as a bedroom where my parents slept, and then from their bed into a crib, which is where I slept until I was 6. So, yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah. It was a great way to live. I don't recall that as a time of hardship or any of that. It was a really loving, lovely place to live.
Yeah, I bet it was. You're talking about an environment where people don't take anything for granted. They're very grateful for what they have, and I can understand how your memories of that probably are. I don't know if sweet is the right word or not, but I'm sure it had a significant formative impact on you. Yeah.
So it was just a very kind of sweet, safe, kind of cocooned feeling there. And in truth, my goals were to just be in the world, to go to school, to play outside. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite books is a book called The Horizontal World, Growing Up Wild in the Middle of Nowhere. And it's about growing up in North Dakota and the kind of the simplicity and the wholesomeness of that experience. So I always had this sense that there was something out there somewhere that might be of interest. that might matter to me, but I was pretty content. I was, I played a lot of music. I took a lot of music lessons. I was happy with that aspect of my life, and that was enough for me.
Well, now, let me ask you this. In a community of 112 citizens, I assume there was no school in town. So how far did you have to go to find schooling, and where did you find a music teacher?
A couple of places. First of all, there was a school. The first, second, and third grades were all in the same room, and there was no such thing as kindergarten, right? So when the second graders were having their lessons, and I was a first grader, we played jacks on the floor. Right?
How about that?
Yeah, and I got pretty good at playing jacks, actually. But
I bet you did.
So, and it stayed like that until I was in sixth grade. And then in sixth grade, we combined schools with a town that was about 18 miles away. And the grade school went to school in the other town, and the high schoolers came to the town that I lived in. So every morning I went to school. I got on a bus. The bus met the bus from the other town in a farmer's yard. We all got off the bus and changed buses. So the bus driver didn't have to drive that whole 18 miles because it's North Dakota and it's icy and snowy and all that stuff. And so we would go to school in this town called Sutton, and the high school kids would come to Glenfield, where I grew up. And then at day's end, we would do that whole scramble again in the same farmer's yard and exchange school buses and go home. But it was a great expansion of my world. I was really dazzled by being in this larger community and, all of these other people that I knew nothing about. I didn't know they were even there before. So it really sort of widened my experience in the world and fed into that notion that, there's probably something beyond this little prairie town that was kind of fun to explore.
Our next clip features Dr. Emily Silverman, an internist in San Francisco, who invented a storytelling event called The Nocturnist, where physicians at various stages of their career get in front of a mic, in front of a live audience, and simply tell a story. It turned out to be a huge success, and it morphed into an equally successful podcast. So let's hear Dr. Emily Silverman tell her story of the storytellers. Well, I think this is probably the perfect place to begin talking about The Nocturnist. And just for the benefit of our listeners, I'm going to let you explain exactly what that is. But it really is a remarkable program that I want to talk about at some length. But this is actually something that you invented while you were still in residency. And I'm just the thought of that blows me away. So if you could fill us in about the origins of the idea and how you made it happen, I'm dying to know.
Yeah, it really feels like a turning point for me because like I said to you earlier, my whole life I kind of chugged along on the conveyor belt, like I was an excellent sheep, which is a term that, I can't remember the name of the author, but there's an author who wrote a book called Excellent Sheep, which is just about, people who don't really have a mind of their own, but just jump like puppies through the hoops to try to get, as far along as they can on the conveyor belt of success. And so I kind of was that for a long time. And I feel like that ended with The Nocturnist. The Nocturnist was really the first time that I ever originated something, that came from inside of me. It came very much from a place of just that creation from a need that I had. So what happened? So I was in my second year of residency. I was coming up for air after intern year, finally had a handle on medicine, had a handle on, where the bathrooms were at the hospital, and felt like I was hitting my stride a bit. And I don't know, I saw that there was a need, there was a gap there. there were so many, how should I put this? I feel like in the 3 years of residency, I lived 10 years or 20 years. Like there's just an accelerated maturation process that happens when you're surrounded by so much suffering and illness and death. Like you're really forced to confront questions around pain and suffering and mortality that most people of our age aren't. So, but then there was no place to talk about that. And in fact, not only was there not a place to talk about it, but I feel like there's this silent culture of like, it's not okay to talk about it. Or if we show doubt or weakness or exhaustion or whatever it is, that somehow signals that we don't have what it takes and things like that. So I really wanted to bring people together just to tell stories about their lives and their experience. And what ended up happening is I went to a live show called The Moth, which I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar.
Great show. Yeah.
It's a great show. A friend brought me, and it's just people standing on stage one by one telling true stories about themselves. And it just clicked. I was like, oh, we should be doing this in medicine. And, you know, I had 4 days off a month, and, you know, I would get in my car on my day off and drive around San Francisco and visit all the theaters and walk in and say, hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I would like to rent this theater. How much would it cost? It was like, it was this.
Oh my goodness.
I had never done anything like that before. And it really feels like I just got possessed by like some kind of other consciousness. And January 2016, I rented one of the spaces, fortunately found a small room really that I think they rented it to me for like $90 and got 40 people in a room and got 8 people to speak. And there was no preparation. There was no coaching. There was no workshopping. It was more of an open mic kind of thing. And it was shaky and it was imperfect, but it was real and it was raw. And there were a lot of tears in the audience and people were really just speaking their vulnerability. And there was also like funny stories and joy.
Did it have a name at that point, and did you record
Did it have a name at that point? I think it did. I think I named it before the very first show. So yes, it did have a name, The Nocturnus.
Yeah. How'd you pick that?
How did I pick that? I made a list of names, and I went over to my friend Rob's house and I read him the list. And when I got to The Nocturnus, he said, that's the one. And I really trusted him because he's not a physician and he just has an eye for style and for aesthetics and for branding. I don't like the word branding, but it is what it is. And when I saw him react like that, I was like, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I don't think you could have picked a better one. I mean, this is about the thoughts that come to people when they're alone, and you're rarely more alone than you are in the middle of the night. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
But go ahead. I'm taking over the story here.
No, I'm glad that the name lands with you. Yeah. What was I was saying? So the very first show, yes, it had a name. People came, people spoke. And then when the event ended, people came up and said, when's the next one? And so the second show was in a theater of 80 seats. And I think to rent that theater, it was like, I don't know, somewhere between $500 and $1,000, which at the time felt so expensive. And I sort of took a leap and I said, you know what, I'm going to rent this place and I'm just going to pay for it myself on my meager resident salary and just hope that I can recoup the costs with ticket sales. And I charged $5 a ticket and I recouped the cost and then some. We filled it up and then we, did it again, and then we did it again. And
how did you publicize it? How did you recruit an audience?
What's amazing is for the first few years of this, we were selling out shows with pretty much no advertising. It was, I would send an email to the residency. I would send an email to my friends, and, the chiefs would announce it sometimes at the noon conference, and that was it. I think somewhere along the way, I built a website and people could subscribe with a newsletter, but we really weren't like printing posters or postcards or, buying ads on the radio. We had no money. That's the thing. We had, and when I say we, I say me, because it really was me for the first, definitely for the first show. And then for the second show, I was joined by Ali Block, who's our executive producer now. And then it was the two of us, and we had nothing.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. In episode number 76, I spoke with Dr. John Chuck, a recently retired family physician from Southern California, about his new book, Pearls from the Practice of Life, A Family Physician's Guide to Struggle Less and Thrive More. In this clip, he talks about how you can find some of the best leaders in the most unlikely places. I want to ask you a little bit of an off-the-wall question, if you will. And I think it's really brilliant that you were able to get some of the most visible practitioners in the Kaiser Permanente group to be available as influencers for your colleagues. When I look back on my education and my career, I noticed that quite a number, probably most of the big influencers for me, were people who didn't really have a lot of titles. You know, the people who were at the top of the heap were sort of busy making big decisions and steering the ship and that sort of thing. But the people that I had so much respect for, they were not in those positions. They were the day-to-day people that I had conversations with over coffee and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if you think is it possible that our most visible leaders are not necessarily our best examples, our best mentors? What do you think?
I think that our visible leaders sort of set the tone for, who we are and who we want to be and where we want to go. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that many of the most influential leaders who make a difference on a day-to-day basis have no titles at all. So actually, one of my favorite leaders who I admired the most during, my career at Kaiser was Carlos, who was our head custodian at the Kaiser Davis Clinic. You say, well, what does Carlos do? Well, first of all, he kept the place spick and span. And, we do all these member patient satisfaction surveys. And I guarantee you that if our clinic is not super clean and tidy and smelling wonderful, there's no way that I could do a service recovery despite my best efforts. And Carlos not only kept our place looking great, but when we had a patient with lice or there was vomit and everybody is so afraid and wigs out, Carlos shows up like the professional he is and does his job with a smile. But he did more than that, actually. Carlos was also the guy that inspired us to exercise more. So at lunch, despite his busy days, he would go on a walk and invite the rest of us to go on a walk. And in Davis, it's sometimes 107 degrees at lunchtime, but he was very consistent. And he said, hey, and I said, Carlos, I'm busy. He goes, hey, no, if you walk with me, you'll feel better when you come back. You'll be a better doctor this afternoon. Sure enough, whenever I joined him, I was sort of infected by his enthusiasm. And yeah, it is true. If you work straight through lunch and then try and grind out in the afternoon, you're just a skeleton of what you could be. So yeah, I would say he was a leader professionally, but also culturally, and sort of like service with a smile. I thought, if Carlos can clean up vomit with a smile and a professional attitude, I can deal with a narcotic-seeking patient or borderline personality or somebody, filing a formal complaint against me. I mean, so yeah, I absolutely agree. I think some of my favorite role models are people who don't have official leadership titles.
Next up in our list of memorable episodes, we have Dr. Jayesh Shah. Jay has fashioned himself into a leader in the field of chronic wound care. In episode number 64, he talks about how that was a bit of an accident. As you moved through your training in internal medicine, where did you think that your future was at that point? What were you planning at that point as a second-year, third-year resident in internal medicine?
Well, in meantime, I got married, and so then that changed a little bit of priorities, and we wanted to then settle down. And so we were looking for a job opportunity, and I was on a visa, which I don't know you'll be familiar with, but I was on a J1 visa.
Yeah, sure.
And that required us to go to a rural area to serve for at least 3 years. So I was looking for a job in a rural area, and I ended up finding a job in Uvalde, Texas, for my J1 waiver. And
okay. What is the next most recognizable place to
It's very close to it's very close to San Antonio. It is. That's where we ended up after my waiver was done. But that's an interesting twist of my career, that how I ended up into wound care, which is probably going to be next question. So
absolutely. The number of internists that decided to get into wound care, I can count on the fingers of one hand, I'm sure. So continue with the story, please.
Yeah. So what happened in Uvalde is as they hired me to do a private practice in internal medicine, but at the same year, they were opening a wound healing and hyperbaric center. And I was the new kid in the block. All of the doctors were senior doctors who had no interest to learn something new. So the hospital administration kind of looked at me and said, Jay, will you be interested? And I said, well,
wow.
I said, well, I'm going to look into it. And I met Dr. Paul Sheffield in San Antonio. And I said, let me first learn about this before I say yes or no. And
so your entire career was turned on the serendipitous whim of a hospital administrator in rural Southwest Texas.
That is exactly right. And,
all right, we'll continue with the story.
And it definitely is a calling too, because at that time, if you remember, Dr. Cook, this is 25, 30 years ago.
Right.
And the wound care was really not very well done, And a lot of these patients were just going from one place to another. And I, being a new doctor, was getting most of those patients because many of them other doctors didn't want to really take care of those wound care
Exactly.
patients.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
everybody thought hyperbaric oxygen was voodoo. I mean, it was a different time.
Yeah, and no one really wanted to do wound care. So I was getting those patients anyway as a new doctor in the practice. So I said, well, this is more help from the hospital with the nurses and everything. And I'll get to learn a new technology. So I said, I'm going to go for it. And that's how everything started,
That is really amazing. I had no idea. What a great story. Well, all right. Go on from there. I mean, I want to make sure that our audience understands that Dr. Shah is one of the most recognizable names in the wound care landscape today. So tell us what happened next.
And again, I think I think it's just a calling. If you really look at it, I really felt terrible about our wound care patients that,
they are really, truly a very neglected group of people, are they not?
Exactly. And that at that time, I felt like, I really need to do something to help this group of patients. And I put all my mental energy, passion to learn everything I can about wound care. I was in small town, but I basically developed a practice and learned everything that anybody will do in a big city.
Yeah.
And my name got pretty recognized in neighboring city in San Antonio. And they started talking about getting me in San Antonio. So that's the kind of how I ended up in San Antonio.
I see.
And then Dr. Sheffield was really a good mentor.
That's a good connection.
Right, who's running the hyperbaric courses.
Yeah,
so,
and tell the audience about Dr. Sheffield.
Yeah, Dr. Paul Sheffield is kind of a guru in hyperbaric medicine. So he runs the hyperbaric medicine courses. He's the one of the first one who found, the role of oxygen and measured oxygen around the wound by putting electrode around the wound and to be able to identify that wound hypoxia.
And I believe not an MD. Am I correct about that?
No, he's PhD. Yeah, he's a
PhD, a researcher. Yeah.
He's
so go ahead. I apologize for the interruptions, but I'm very excited about this.
And I think we just connected well, and and I think after that I've been helping him with his teaching in his courses in wound care. Yeah. And I kind of gave an idea that we should do wound care course, and he has been doing hyperbaric course for a long time. So we kind of now have both wound care and hyperbaric course every month. And so we have taught at least every month you have 50 students every month. So probably we have taught more than 10 to 20,000 students so far.
So in our final clip in this year's holiday episode, we're featuring Dr. Scott Abramson from episode number 61. He has a great message about the importance of communication for physicians, and it comes with a really interesting anecdote about how he made that discovery. There's this interesting sort of duplicitous attitude toward Kaiser Permanente, but because you've been part of it all of your professional life, I don't know that you're aware of it. And I think back in the 40s when they came into existence, the American Medical Association was just violently opposed to managed care.
Yeah.
And yet Kaiser became very successful. I have to think that they couldn't have had they not been doing well by their patients. They have had their share of problems, of course, but yet they apparently are continuing to provide good care. And it sounds like that it was a very satisfying experience for you. And in fact, I'm going to quote you in the little bio that you sent me. For 25 years, you've been passionately involved in the communication mission at Kaiser Permanente. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about how that got your attention and how you became to use your words, passionately involved?
Thank you for asking that question, Randy. So I worked at Kaiser for over 40 years, and it's kind of a quirk of dates. I started in 79. I retired in 2020. So if you add it up, it's parts of 6 decades.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know. Ted Williams, he was from 1939 to 1960, 4 decades. That's pretty good. Yeah, he couldn't swing a reflex hammer
beat
like
him.
me.
Yeah,
I know.
right.
I did. So I think that if it wasn't for the communication mission that Kaiser initiated, and this is another great thing about Kaiser. Kaiser said, this is back in the 90s, and they said, we want to improve our communication, doctors and patients. And so they asked for volunteer doctors, and volunteer doctors decided and got together and worked with the knowledge that was there and developed workshops and courses. And basically, and it's something that is actually comes from the ground up, that it comes from the individual physicians who volunteer for this mission, who establish the programs and who deliver the programs. And so that's how it is. But how I got involved in it is kind of interesting to me. In 1992, I happened to go to my first Toastmaster meeting. Now, a lot of your listeners may not know what Toastmasters is. Are you familiar with it, Randy?
Yeah, I am. And I didn't want to interrupt, but I really am. And maybe you're ready to tell me, but I'm really fascinated to know why that caught your attention and why you decided you wanted to check out that organization. It's not something that a lot of physicians involve themselves in, I think.
Right.
So you take it from there.
Yeah. So basically, I thought Toastmasters, so they go to teach how to make a toast at a wedding or something, but it's not. It's an organization, purely voluntary, that teaches public speaking, that teaches people how to speak public. But when people hear about it or know something about it, that's what they think. But it's more than that. It's about teaching people public listening. Public listening. Yes. Because one of the exercises at Toastmasters is there'll be 3 people that will give a speech, a 5 to 7 minute speech. And then each one of those persons will be assigned an evaluator. So that person listens very closely to the speech and then stands up and gives a 3-minute evaluation of the speech, talking what was done well, what could have been done better, and so forth. So to me, it was so valuable in really teaching listening skills. And then I sort of brought that into the clinical exam room, and I realized that what I was doing a lot of talking, a lot of explaining, a lot of finding and fixing, and I wasn't listening. And so I started to listen more to patients and really try to get a sense of what was going on. And right at the same time, Kaiser launched this communication project. And so naturally, I took one of the workshops, and then I watch one, do one, teach one type thing. And then I really became involved in developing programs for our group and, teaching courses and so forth. But that's kind of how it came back. Attribute Toastmasters with really awakening this passion in me, and then Kaiser coming up with a platform so that I could express it.
Sounds like it. You think that it made you a better physician.
It did. Absolutely. And I can tell you, Randy, I would have retired maybe 10 years, 15 years earlier if I hadn't. Yeah. So
this involvement with the communication mission at Kaiser Permanente led you into a project of coaching physicians. And I want to know more about when that started and how that started and how it's affected your life. Okay. So we do a lot of different programs, and there are like 50 in my area, Northern California. We have like 50 different Kaiser clinics and maybe 15 or 20 hospitals. So, and each one sort of has their own way of doing things. And then we have some regional programs where we all get together. So we do a lot of different things. I mean, we have didactic things. We do role plays. We have video vignettes and discuss things. I think the most effective thing we have is what we call our communication intensive. And what we do there is we invite maybe 30 doctors
to an offsite, and we go someplace out in the woods with a nice place, where nice meals and all that, forest. And for 4 days, we just do communication and we do experiential stuff. So what we will do, we work in small groups of 4, maybe 5, and we will have a doctor set up a scenario for himself. Like maybe he'll be something like, gosh, I really have trouble with the person asking for disability or something. We invite actors. We have actors, paid actors that come in. We set up a scenario where they will have this interaction. And it will go on for maybe 30, 35 minutes. And while we're doing that, we videotape them, the interaction. As we're doing this, at certain points along, when there's a teaching moment, we'll stop the video, we'll replay it, we'll ask the physician, how did you think things were going? What went right? What went wrong? We'll ask the actor who plays the patient, and they are so in tune and sensitive about this. We'll ask them, how did you feel when he said that? And you get so much feedback. And then we get feedback from the other participants in the small group, 4 or 5 people, and plus the facilitators. Every group has a facilitator, which was me or my colleagues. So this is one of the things we do, and it's an intense program. It goes on all day into the evening for 4 days, and it is an incredible learning experience for physicians.
Thank you so much for listening today and throughout this past year. We'll be back beginning January 3rd with episode number 1 of season number 4. So please make plans to join us. We want to wish you and viewers a very joyous holiday season, and we look forward to bringing you more conversations with the most interesting people in healthcare in the new year. That's all we have for now, so please be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.